We're back again today with another Pot Limit Omaha hand from Gus Hansen and his return to the PLO tables a couple weeks ago. I think this is a spot that many PLO players around the world find themselves in, and hopefully you'll be able to figure out a better way to think about it and approach the situation. Reminder that Upswing Poker and Jay Nandez's PLO course is officially available. The link is in the description below. If you follow that link and purchase the course, you get extra bonus material from myself that's PLO and GTO club related, as well as a copy of my book, Chasing the Poker Dream. I had Jay Nandez on the podcast yesterday. You can check that out on my YouTube channel. All right, let's go ahead and let's get to the hand. Hand starts off at 100, 100, 200 straddle, 400 straddle, and 800 straddle. Yeah, this game's crazy. An 800 euro straddle. And it folds around to Gus Hansen, who's in the first straddle, Ace-Jack 6-5. He goes ahead, limps in with his hand. Loose Leon in the other straddle. Obviously, Loose Leon, legendary King's Casino owner. This guy, one of my favorite PLO players. He goes ahead and calls with Jack 6-5-4. Jan-Peter Jakman in the fifth straddle. Probably isn't well known to a lot of people around the world, but very well known amongst the high stakes PLO circle. Plays a ton of cash games. He's got a bracelet in a PLO tournament. I've had the pleasure of playing with him one time out in Vegas. Played some high stakes PLO together. It was fun, man. He comes there to play. He's an action player, likes to bluff, likes to make big bets. And I mean, it's the kind of guy that you want to come play PLO with. You don't want to play with some nits. You're going to take some beatings, but you're also going to get a chance to potentially win it back. He's got Queen Jack 10-9 with one suit in the fifth straddle. He goes ahead, makes a raise. Gus goes ahead and calls with his hand, Ace-Jack 6-5. And Loose Leon is going to get out of the way here. When we look at the hand, I think it's pretty standard. And you're not folding the straddles. Ace-Jack 6-5. Yeah, I mean, you're not looking to fold that hand, especially when you're in the straddle. For some reason, I think a lot of players feel much more married to their hands when you straddle. And I'm the same way. I'm not looking to fold. So he goes ahead and makes the call. I think Jan-Peter Jakman's raise, perfectly fine. Queen Jack 10-9. Nice connected hand. I love it. One of my favorite hands. Let's see the flop. Flop comes down, Ace-Jack 6 with two hearts. Gus Hansen has three pair. We need a nickname for three pair, I think. Jan-Peter Jakman has middle pair with a gut shot straight draw. Yeah, so Gus's hand, the announcer says Gus has this monster hand, this strong hand, and then he brings up maybe Gus is probably going to check raise here and just take the hand down. So I think this is a hand that some PLO players see and they say, oh wow, we got a monster hand. But they're very deep. They're about 120,000 behind. Super, super deep. Typically, if you're going to check raise here, you're going to want something to go along with your hand. You're going to want a flush draw. You're going to want a straight draw. And even honestly, some ace-jacks with a straight draw. You're probably going to raise those hands, first of all, pre-flop. So this isn't really a spot where I'm looking to shovel a ton of money in this deep. Deep stack PLO is about making the nuts, about making nut draws, and about putting a lot of money in when you have those hands. Deep stack PLO is not about putting a lot of money in with very vulnerable hands that could be completely crushed by your opponent when you're out of position. I think Jan-Peter Jakman can easily have set aces, ace-jack with better cards to go along with it. He could have ace with a high flush draw that he's just not going to fold. So I think this is just a hand where it just comes up in PLO. We're out of position with a marginal hand pre-flop. We hit a pretty strong flop for a hand, and we just simply have to check call. Gus checks, and Jan-Peter Jakman bets 3,000. Gus goes ahead and makes a check call. I think everything right here is perfectly fine and perfectly standard. Let's go ahead and see the turn. Turn comes down. It's the 8 of hearts. The flush completes. So now Gus's hand, I think when we have Gus's hand, we say, man, I was trying to avoid a heart. Fuck, why did that come? What am I going to do now? So I think it's just a hand where you're pretty much looking to always check call two straights here. I think your opponent is going to often two barrel this spot. I think when we look back on our range, while we do have some flush draws in our hand, I think often we're going to have a little bit weaker of hands, some one pairs with gut shots, maybe an ace with King 10, ace, queen 10, 3, maybe something like that. Jack, king 10, 3, 5, 7, something around that nature with maybe one suit pre-flop. Obviously, we're going to have the ace sixes. We're going to have some ace jacks. We're going to have some flush draws in our hand too. But I think this is a perfectly fine two barrel from Jan-Peter. I like his size. He goes very tiny, 5,000 into 13.8 thousand, I believe. When you think about a small bet on the flop is going to induce some wider check calls, well, now this small bet is then going to make some of those wider check calls have to fold the turn. I don't think he's going to get bluffed very often from Gus. Now, he does turn the wrap as well, and you might say, well, why don't you just check back and maybe realize your equity with the wrap against some type of ace? that maybe even some 2-pair, Jack 8, Ace 8, Ace 6, Ace, something like that, and then even potentially maybe bluff the river. But I think a bet is perfectly fine in Jan Peter's spot. So now Gus has a decision. He thinks about it for a bit. He goes ahead and check calls. And now we go to the river where things get interesting. River comes down, pairs the board, 8 of diamonds. Now things get pretty interesting. Gus checks pretty quickly over to Jan Peter, and he does the classic live pro thing of looks at the pot aggressively. He goes, what's in the pot? Counts out some chips. Dream machine in his mind comes to 19,000 into a spot of about 23.8 thousand. So now, what would you do in this situation? You know, what is your mindset when you get to this river and you're thinking about what your opponent hand is? I think that most people are going to say, oh man, you know, this guy has a full house, but we have the ace, the jack, the 6. And also we go back to the story that our opponent tells us. So is our opponent going to bet a hand that has an 8 and another card, or aces or jacks on this turn when the flush gets there? Now we might go back to his sizing and say that, well, he's merging his range on the turn, right? I'm trying not to use those kind of terms here, but let's say that Jan Peter is going to bet his top 2 pair. He's going to bet his ace 8 for protection against some hands, and maybe try to fold out some hands that might be even better than him, which I don't think is going to work on the turn. He might bet his small flushes that size. He might bet some of his sets that size, which is going to be a strategy that some players do go ahead and utilize as well. I don't know if I don't quite think that's going to actually happen, but there is a chance that could be taking place, and that's sort of how he's deciding to play his range. So you come to this river, and now you say, well, he bet very big, sort of polarizing his range here in this spot. So would he do this with the king high flush when the board pairs? Honestly, I think he probably should. I don't think it's very likely that Gus is going to have a full house here with 8s in his hand with an ace 8 or 8. It's just, I don't think it's going to be that likely of a scenario. So I think if you have a king high flush in this spot, you should probably bet it this big. Would he bet the queen high flush this big? I don't think so. Would he bet his full house is this big? Well, yes, he would. So now we're in Gus's spot. We say, okay, what do we do here? So, and I've said spot a lot in this video. I'm going to say hand. I need to think of like 4 different words to say instead of spots. I'm going to say hand, 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 hand. It could be a hand where you'd consider turning your hand to a bluff. Now, you could do that as when the board pairs in the river. You could lead out as a bluff. You could decide to check pot or check raise sometimes as a bluff. I don't necessarily think it will be super credible in this hand because, as I mentioned before, I think it's hard to end up with ace 8 here. I mean, you certainly can have some sets, a set of jacks or a set of 6s, but I don't think those hands are ever going to check raise the river in Gus's scenario hand spot. So yeah, I don't think that it would be just a very likely story if Gus did decide to turn his hand to a bluff here. I think he has to be scared of aces in Jan Peter's spot, especially with this big bet. So, but it's something to consider. I mean, if he did check pot, what could he fold out? I guess he folds out the king high flush. He probably doesn't fold out the a full house in Jan Peter's spot. I mean, he might fold out a full house in Jan Peter's spot. But I don't know. I mean, I guess, you know, I like to think about all the scenarios and I kind of just, you know, play with things. Some people say I just fucking rambling and talking stuff, which, you know what? I kind of am, man. I don't do many videos like this. I'm still getting used to kind of talking over the hands out loud. Now we look at Jan Peter's bluff and we say, is this a good bluff or is this a bad bluff? And at first glance, I think it's a pretty bad bluff. But at the same time, I think it's a bad bluff in that I just don't see many hands Gus is going to fold here that he calls the turn with. So we already went through his range. We already threw his range on the turn, and we said he's got some of those small flushes and a bunch of different 2-pair combinations potentially, and some, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we narrowed it down to. So now we could say maybe an a6 might have to fold here. Maybe not. Maybe an a6 does hero call if it has even if it has a ace king 6, something like that. I think a small flush is in a very similar spot because, once again, we sort of said that Jan Peter's range is going to be pretty polarized here to full houses and to king high flushes, and not always the king high flush with this size. So we could say Gus's hand, ace jack here, it isn't necessarily the same as a small flush because we do block full house combinations that Jan Peter can have. And once again, I kind of, we rewind to the turn, and would he bet those hands on the turn? So this is kind of why this is just a really bad bluff card for Jan Peter. I think if I'm going to bluff here, which I don't think I'm going to, because I don't think a smaller size is going to get the job done. And I mean, this is kind of maybe a hand where you just need to give it up. You just check back and you just lose, because while we think that we have this, we raise pre-flop, so we think that we have maybe a lot of aces and we have a lot of jacks and maybe we have some ace eights and stuff like that and stronger flushes. I just, like I said, I don't think it quite breaks down that way with the story being told. So in Gus's spot, he thinks about it for a long time. He says, all right, what should I do? Should I call or should I fold? And finally, he decides, make the hero call, takes down the pot of about 62,000 euro. And I like his call. I think he came to the same conclusion that I sort of came at after I saw the cards and knew exactly what was going to happen. So, but now you have a little bit more knowledge and an idea of how to think about it when you're breaking down a hand that this comes up in your local casino or online, and your opponent makes a bet and you say, man, what exactly is my opponent representing here? I think now you have a better idea of how to think about it. Hopefully you don't make the wrong call or fold in the future. Thank you very much. We'll be back tomorrow with another PL Oker hand.